Welcome to the show. This is Jason Hartman, your host, and every 10th episode we do something kind of special, kind of different. What we do is we go off topic. So regardless of which show it is on the Hartman Media Network, whether it be one of the financial shows, economics, real estate investing, travel, longevity, all of the other topics that we have, every 10th episode we go off topic and we explore something of general interest, something of general life success value. And so many of our listeners around the world in 164 countries have absolutely loved our 10th episode shows. So that's what we're going to do today. And let's go ahead and get to our guest with a special 10th episode show. And of course, on the next episode, we'll be back to our regular programming. Here we go.
This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Hey, Jason, this is Scott Crook. I was on the Empowered Investor Zoom call last night and just so thankful for the value that's created inside that group. And, you just consistently bring subjects that are so important and relevant to what I'm needing and I believe other investors need. So thank you so much. I appreciate you and all that you've done for helping us become better investors. Thanks, man.
Welcome to the Creating Wealth Show with Jason Hartman. You're about to learn a new slant on investing, some exciting techniques, and fresh new approaches to the world's most historically proven asset class that will enable you to create more wealth and freedom than you ever thought possible. Jason is a genuine self-made multimillionaire who's actually been there and done it. He's a successful investor, lender, developer, and entrepreneur who's owned properties in 11 states, had hundreds of tenants, and been involved in thousands of real estate transactions. This program will help you follow in Jason's footsteps on the road to your financial independence day. You really can do it. And now, here's your host, Jason Hartman, with the complete solution for real estate investors.
Welcome to episode 1970. And if you're watching on video, I know this is kind of an unusual view. I'm out here on the deck of the cruise ship. This is the deck for the stateroom, and just always want to give you kind of an interesting view of things. So we've got our Alabama property tour coming up, and I hope you're joining us for that. Of course, you know where to sign up. Just go to the website, jasonhartman.com, and sign up there. And today we have a 10th episode show. And when we do a 10th episode show, we do something of general interest, a topic that is not necessarily related to finance and investing, but it always seems to come back to that. It really does. Actually, maybe I can take my glasses off. I don't know. Am I squinting? I'm probably squinting too much here. But a topic of general interest. And this one is of incredibly important interest because we are on the verge of a demographic cliff. Now, this is a very early warning, and it does affect your real estate investments, of course, but it will take a good 20 years or so for this to play out in a substantial way. We, every single year, every day, every month, really, we see the effects of it. But the cumulative effect and the big effect, the cliff, the demographic cliff, really plays out in about 20-ish years, give or take. Depends on a lot of factors. Of course, this stuff is very complicated, but we're going to go into that today a bit because we have got a guest for you for our 10th episode show. And over the years, we've had no shortage on this show with almost 2,000 episodes of controversial guests. And today it might be controversial to some, but to most it really shouldn't be. We're going to have Rich Cooper with us here today, and we're going to talk about that demographic cliff and the ingredients, the things that are causing it. And I think this will be a really interesting episode for you. We've been conducting an experiment for over 60 years now in the Western world, and this experiment radically changed the way we do dating and mating. It changed everything. Music, Hollywood, economics, just a radical shift in the way things were done for thousands and thousands of years of human history before that. So this radical change, this experiment, it's fair to ask, if you are male, if you are female, if you are a child affected by this experiment, by this 60-year-old experiment that radically changed the way we've done things for thousands and thousands of years, it's fair to ask, how is it working? How is it working for you? How is it working for others? How is it working for society? How is it working for the economy? How is it working for your investment portfolio? How's it working for children? This experiment had such wide-ranging impact on the Western world. It's absolutely astonishing how powerful this experiment was. And we're going to talk about that today. So let's go ahead and get into it. But first, be sure you've registered for the Alabama Property Tour. We look forward to seeing you there. And we have our 10th episode guest today. And let's dive in with the discussion with Rich Cooper. It is my pleasure to welcome Rich Cooper to the show. He is the host of the Entrepreneurs in Cars podcast and YouTube channel, has a lot of great commentary on business, on success, and mostly geared toward men and how to be a better man, how to chase excellence and not chase women, but chase excellence. Rich, welcome. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks for having me, Jason.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. I just wanted to kind of maybe start with, maybe for those who don't know you, just a broad macro view of you and what you teach and kind of an outline of your philosophy, if you will.
Yeah, great question. So I was in the credit and debt collection space for about 20 odd years, took a package, went home, started up my own business, did very well with that. And about 7 or 8 years ago, I wanted to get out of it. So I kind of looked at YouTube and saw what was going around. And my original plan was to interview entrepreneurs in their success ride. So I called the YouTube channel Entrepreneurs in Cars. Ran out of friends with cool cars to interview real quick, kind of started filling in videos with other ideas around entrepreneurship. People started asking me for tips and advice just because they seemed to like the way that I communicated and dispensed advice. And someday, guy came along and said, Rich, you should talk about the kind of women that you want to avoid dating so you don't complicate your life. So I did a video on that, and that blew up in the algorithms. Started to talk a little bit more about making my own wounds my work. Talked about my divorce, talked about my experiences dating, and everything sort of that it integrates in and around that. And that kind of led me to 2 or 3 different podcast series. The main one that I do right now is called the Unplugged Alpha. It ties into the book that I've written. I have a follow-up book coming out, which is a bestseller. So that's how we got here today, my friend, in 2023.
So when it comes to the marketplace for dating and mating, it's interesting, and I've talked a lot about this on my show. And so let's go way back to the 1950s, for example, and think about if you were in government in the 50s, or if you were in the corporatocracy in the 50s, right? These two different groups, if you're in government, you think, well, we had this baby boom post-World War II. It's been great for the economy. And, by the late 50s, it's starting to peter out. And we got to keep the economy going, increase the GDP. We got almost half the country's population at home, not producing any tax revenue, not growing the economy, doing domestic work. And if we could figure out a way to make them get into the workforce, we could grow the economy, and that would be good for getting reelected. And if we're in the corporatocracy and we've got consumer products that we want to sell, if we could get people to be discontents, maybe keep them single, or if they're married, make them discontent so they would split up, we could sell them 2 toasters instead of 1 toaster. 2 coffee makers instead of 1 coffee maker, 2 sofas instead of 1 sofa. If you have 2 households, you basically doubled your market share of virtually every product on earth, practically, right? Yep. Because you're not sharing things like couples and families do.
Correct.
So I believe this is a very much, and I don't want to use the C word, conspiracy, but look at it. Conspiracy is nothing more than people planning things, right? More than one person planning something, So what has happened to our culture, and where are we now?
Yeah, you're giving them a lot of credit. I know exactly where you're going.
Maybe
with
too
this.
much.
Maybe too much. I don't know. I mean, could there be a room full of elites sitting there that that had planned this out? Maybe it's just a coincidence that this is where we are today. But yeah, it's awfully obvious to me as well that that's pretty much what happened that led us to where we are today. The fabric of the nuclear family has been torn apart. Women were thrust in the workforce. They don't need any man anymore. Divorce rates start to skyrocket, no fault. Divorce comes in play. You get the different waves of feminism that sort of follow with that. And we end up in an environment today where we've got confusion around who's the mommy and who's the daddy. And, anything can happen, right? They're rewriting the rule book on everything. I was just filling out a application to get my daughter's passport renewed, and it was indicating stuff on there that I haven't seen before.
Yeah, right.
It doesn't say mother or father anymore. Now it says parent. Or in one area where it was an older form, it actually said with an attachment, if you don't like that term, then just cross it out and put parent instead of mother or father.
And for the record, we should mention you're Canadian. So
yes, this is the way that Justin Trudeau's Canada is heading, in fact. So that's what's been going on. Where's it going? Probably going to continue in that direction is what I'm seeing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I look back to, let's move forward in time here as we discuss this stuff, like the 70s, right? And I remember, I think it was in the 70s, where you have, and I like to watch old movies, listen to old music, and read old books, and watch old TV shows. I always tell my listeners to do that, just to see the perspective of how far we've fallen as a culture and how badly the culture war has really hurt all of us. I think men, women, everybody, certainly children. And, you had movies like Kramer versus Kramer.
Yeah.
You had music in the 70s that was really loving. It was men pining over women. And you look at the just disgusting music that has pervaded our culture, really since 1990, and how this has just changed attitudes. And it seems like not too many people are very happy with the way this has worked out. Would you say that's true?
I think a lot of people aren't that happy about it, but they're not vocal enough about it. Like when I was a kid, I was a bit of a rocker. So I was a metalhead. I like my heavy metal. I'm a kid of the 70s. The PRMC was around at that time, and Tipper Gore and whatever movement was behind her to sort of censor music. And they started with rock, Twisted Sister, a lot of the other metal bands. And they had these hearings, and you'd hear about the stuff on the news, and like what was really wrong with bands like Twisted Sister, right? Yeah. I want to rock, I'm me, sort of standing up for yourself and having an identity. And they wanted to take that down. But today we have music where you have, WAP, you have Lil Nas twerking on the devil. There's all this stuff, proliferate culture, and it's like now commons, our children are being exposed to this on a consistent basis at a level that we've never seen before. We're moving into a social experiment that it has yet to show us what it's going to look like. When they become adults, and that part of society becomes the next generation. So I think we're moving into very interesting times. There's a lot of guys that are opting out, and they're choosing to homeschool, move into more rural areas, put their kids into private schools because they want to have more of a say over the sort of information that comes their kids' way. So popular culture is sort of heading in that direction where they're exposing children to artists that sing songs with the acronym WAP. I'm sure your viewers know what that is. Guys like Lil Nas, who are male artists twerking on the devil on their videos. And this is stuff that's available on YouTube, on pretty much any platform. Like when I was a kid, the music streaming platforms were all on TV, and they would often not allow artists that had messages, not even including profanity, but just messages that were like rock or like anything close to that. They would censor. They wouldn't let them go out. So there's kids being exposed to new culture and popular culture at levels that we've never seen before. So it's going to be an interesting experiment to see how it all unfolds.
And I certainly am no fan of censorship, but it's just a reflection of the culture, but not just a reflection of the culture. It's also an agenda on the culture by these powers that be in the music industry. And, my favorite band of all time is Rush. And, their lyrics were so meaningful. I mean, excursions into philosophy and really how to be better. I mean,
great
that's
band. Canadian band too.
Yeah. Oh, hey, it's Canadian power trio, Rush, Triumph. I like them both. Yeah.
Yeah.
And their music, very positive, or at least reflective in questioning culture and why we should believe what we believe, right? But it's just not like that anymore. That Rothschild quote about "Let me control the money, and I care not who makes the laws." I say, "Let me control the music, and I care not who makes the laws or controls the money. The music is everything."
Yeah, well, the music back then encouraged strength, individualism, sort of like the way of men is the way of the gang, and there was sort of like tribes. Today, they kind of want to paint everybody with the same brush, and it's like, here, you're all beige. Yeah. Or let's just take a big brush with a whole bunch of colors on it, and we'll just call it, like the rainbow brush sort of thing. And it's like everybody sort of gets painted the same color. So you're all the same, more diverse, more inclusive, more global. That's just the direction that we're heading in. I've made this observation quite a few years ago. I made a video on my channel, I think around 2016, 2017, because I started to see the writing on the wall. I think I titled the video something along the lines of the feminization of the West. And women are now becoming more masculinized. Men are becoming more feminized. The lines between the genders have blurred completely. I don't know how many genders we have now. I've lost count.
64 according to Facebook.
Yeah. We have different pronouns. We have different, sources of, children now. Men can have periods. Men can compete in women's swimming. There's all kinds of interesting things that are happening. So this is a bizarre time. This is a social experiment that we've never seen before.
Yeah. No, there's no question about it. And some of it is just downright crazy. Frankly, it's so ludicrous. I don't even understand how they can get people to believe some of this stuff. It's just
the same way they boil the frog. They just turn up the temperature a little bit at a time, and people don't really notice, that it's happening, and they sort of comply. Yeah. And speaking of complying, I think that was one of the big tests of society the last couple of years, was the whole beer bug, episode, where it was, let's see if we can get them to stand on dots. Okay, well, let's see if we can get them wear masks everywhere. Okay, let's see if we can get them to take experimental jabs. Let's see. And, the test kept going and going, and people just kept complying and complying. The vast majority of the population does. That's just the way that humans are. We're herd animals. So it's monkey see, monkey do, right?
Yeah. You mentioned earlier feminism, and I think it's really important to talk about this because whether it be first, second, or third wave feminism, and those were very different, obviously. Talk to us a little bit about the impact, and has that helped women or hurt women? Of course, I have my own thoughts on that. But
well, I mean, you're going to get a different answer depending on who you ask, but my opinion is I don't think it's helped women. I think it's hurt society. Like, it's at the stage where it's not really for equality. I don't think you'd find anybody out there that would argue that women can't do or have anything that men have today. Yep. As far as job opportunity, I mean, there's a big push to get, women into boardrooms as CEOs and members, of these types of levels, but there's no push to get women onto oil rigs, coal mines, and on garbage trucks. Yeah. So it's kind of selective. It's kind of like an a la carte menu, which sort of turns it into a supremacy movement at this point, is the way that it's going, where it actually kind of aims to have women dislike men, not see them as peers, not want to be their equals, but actually want to push them down. And you've got a legal system that sort of complies with that with family law. You have a legal system that complies with that with, the whole hashtag Me Too era. So there's a lot of things, there's a lot of moving parts with these mechanisms. So, I mean, like, we can go down that rabbit hole. It just depends on how far you want to take your audience on that one, my friend. Yeah. No, interestingly, it seems like it has created a lot of lonely people and a culture that is just more and more detached. You talk about the government's role, and some people say the government is the new husband. And the government is the head of the household now. There used to be a time where the man was the head of the household and he had responsibility to his family along with authority. Today, if you're a married man, you still have responsibility to the family financially, obviously, but you don't have any authority anymore. The government and the woman is now the head of the household. So that's just the way that things are today, and that's just the direction that we've pushed in based on all the decisions that we made and where we've gone with it all. So if we layer into that the impact of social media, Instagram is the new boyfriend, but not really. It's sort of this attention reward, dopamine reward system,
And this is much different for women than it is for men, because if men post a picture on Instagram, they're not going to get 5,000 comments. Oh, you're beautiful, you're handsome, whatever, right? It just doesn't work the same way between the genders, does it?
It doesn't. And it's actually interesting because I noticed this a while ago. So I'm going to pick up my phone here. And the way that men use social media and Instagram is they'll take their phone and be like, oh, there's a nice car. Let me take a picture of that. Or there's a nice canyon over there. Let me take a picture of that. But women, on the other hand, they take the phone and they do it and they use it like this, right? Because they're pointing the camera that way. So, women use it for validation and to get attention. It's an addiction for a lot of women. For guys, I think they're more addicted to competitive areas like on video games. They're not so concerned with getting likes based on their latest selfie picture, whereas that seems to be the case for women. So it's used very, very differently, between the different sexes.
I remember being at a conference about 20 years ago when the job boards were gaining popularity, and, monster.com was the big job board back then, right? And the talk was about how every employee, now on LinkedIn, of course, basically is always up for grabs. Their resume is always online. They're always available for hire. And now that's become that way where particularly women, because the genders act very differently in the way they engage with social media, are always available. And in the entrepreneurship world, you and I, I'm sure you know about the software called ClickFunnels, right? It's a funnel building software, and that's how you do sales, through a sales funnel. And Instagram is essentially a sales funnel. And it's like, can anyone even be in a relationship anymore? Because if they have a social profile and they're on Instagram and they exhibit this massive amount of narcissism where it's just all these like selfie pictures, it's just frankly weird. I mean, if someone looked at this, if someone time traveled from a couple decades ago and saw this, they would think, have people gone nuts? I mean, this is just like, take it out of context and look at how weird this is, the culture we live in.
Yeah, it is weird. I'm glad that you mentioned that, because one of the things that I talk to a lot of guys about, especially when they're contemplating a relationship or if they're contemplating inviting a woman into their life as a mother and, forming a family, is one of the conversations you have to have when she comes at you and says, hey, Jason, where do we stand? I want to be exclusive with you. I don't want to share you, blah, 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 sort of thing. That's a point where you need to take a look at her social presence. And if she's the kind of gal that has a Instagram and she posts selfies, provocative selfies, of herself on a very regular basis on a public social media site, you have to have that conversation and say, look, I dig your vibe too, but I don't get into relationships with women that behave this way. So if you want to be with me, this is something that you're going to have to give up. And that's a choice that she'll have to make. If she sees him as her hypergamous best option, if she sees him as the guy that she wants to be with, then she'll abandon that. If she doesn't, then she'll probably push back and say something like, oh, you're controlling. Why are you jealous? That's whatever, right? So, it's an interesting time, and it's a conversation our parents certainly didn't have to have with our mothers.
No question about it. Explain hypergamy, if you would.
Yeah, it's a feature of women's dating strategy. It's not a bug. It's something that evolutionary psychology has discussed for decades now. And all that it really means is that women prefer to settle for men of greater value than themselves. So women date across and up on the socioeconomic hierarchy, which is why you'll see Kevin, who's the VP of the accounting department at a large company, marry a woman that might be a $45,000 a year hairdresser. It's pretty common. It's actually one of the things that my divorce lawyer brought to my attention well over a decade ago when we were having our conversations. And, he did mention that it's very, very, very rare that he sees divorce cases where Mr. makes less money than Mrs. Right. Mr. is always, the guy that's usually got a higher ranking job, and she's making a lot less money, doesn't have the same skill set, but that's because women marry across and up. And I said that's a feature, not a bug, because women have always been that way, because if they weren't that way, then their offspring wouldn't have a very good chance to survive. You go back 1,000 years, if she made a mate choice and got pregnant by the loser of the tribe, who didn't have any resources, who couldn't hunt, who couldn't provide, who couldn't protect the family, it would spell certain death. So that still happens today, but it looks it looks a little bit different in the sexual marketplace because women don't really need protection. There's the police force, there's the military. Women don't really need a man for money because they can go to work, but they still prefer to date across and up, which is why one of the complaints a lot of the gals have today, a lot of these professional women that have, gone and chased excellence and they've got their degrees and, they're 35 years old, is they're
making good money.
They're making great money. They're making $100,000-$200,000 a year, and they're having a very, very hard time finding a guy that is willing to, marry them and start a family with them. But what they fail to realize is the guys that they're looking at, the 35, 40, 45-year-old guys, are looking at women as beauty objects, because that's the difference between men and women. Men see women as beauty objects and women see men as success objects. So again, women are hypergamous. They look up at guys, whereas men look at beauty because they're looking at women for fertility reasons. So these guys around their age or a little bit older are generally dating younger women, especially if they're successful and they got their head screwed on right.
Yeah. It's interesting how incongruous the genders are in terms of what they're looking for, right? That is
they're complementary, and they've always been complementary. It's just that the way society is sort of moving today, it's masculinizing more women and it's feminizing more guys. So there's a pretty big divide. So what you were talking about earlier at the start of the show is, there's going to be more households with 2 toasters and 2 couches and probably kids moving back and forth, or in some cases, scenarios where it's just a single parent household and one parent is just moving their resources to the other parent. So that's where we are today, but I don't know where they're going to go with that. Like, how are they going to double down and split that scenario so that they can double up on, tax revenue and, job creation, all that stuff. You really can't go very much farther after you split up the family.
Yeah. They've already sort of maximized that. Unfortunately, it's
child labor. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
We're going to have 9-year-olds with their own houses and couches and toasters. Who knows what they're going to try next?
Maybe those kids have rights, they, who knows? It's absolutely crazy. Rich, there's an old saying that women are concerned with a man's future. Yeah. In other words, how successful is he going to be? How good a provider is he going to be? What resources is he going to be able to offer me? Women are concerned about a man's future, but men are concerned about a woman's past. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah. So again, because women are beauty objects to men, and the key feature that women bring to the table in a man's life is nurturing, the ability to, build a family and provide children to him. Men are especially concerned with paternity. And by default, women have 100% assurance of paternity when they get pregnant. They know for 100% certain that that is their child, it is in their body. Men, on the other hand, don't have assurance of paternity. So the promiscuous sexual marketplace that we have today, with women sleeping around with guys, and they think that there's no consequences to that, they generally come to some rude awakening at some point where they realize that a guy will choose another woman over them because they discover their promiscuous past. So we were talking just before the show, and I was running this poll on social media, and somebody actually, suggested this to me. So I thought that I would frame it this way. Guys, you've got the option of 2 twin sisters. They're both 30. They're both gorgeous. One's been married and now divorced, and she's got 3 kids, but her notch count is 2. She's only been with 2 guys. The other one, her other twin sister, never got married, partied through her 20s, traveled around, and racked up a large notch count, let's say 50 guys. Which one would you rather have? Overwhelmingly, guys so far on that poll are selecting the single mom, which is unusual, because when you invite a single mom into your life, now you're raising another guy's kids, right? Which is not a feature of what men are looking for in their own life, right? Like, they want assurance of paternity, so they want to raise their own kids. So yeah, it's a very bizarre dynamic that's sort of evolving out of where we are and human nature.
Yeah, you talk about notch count, right? Body count, if you will.
Yeah.
And women would say, well, this is unfair. Why is it cool that a man be like a James Bond character, right? Well, look, they like that character. So it's not men's fault, right?
That's what women choose, yeah.
Right. They choose that with overwhelming, majority, right? They'll totally choose that.
Yeah.
And, James Bond can go and sleep around, but yet that standard, when men apply it to women, it's, no, they want a woman who's chaste, who's not promiscuous. Is that fair?
Look, life isn't fair. Life isn't fair for for men or women, depending on how you want to stack it up. And we could spend a lot of time talking about what's not fair to men. We could talk about how men rarely see their kids in divorce. We can talk about how it's more common for a guy's kids to be raised by his ex-wife's boyfriend, and he spends more time with his kids than he does. We can talk about a lot of stuff that's not fair.
And those kids are much more susceptible to abuse and mistreatment with not having their own father present.
I mean, like, we could talk about how it's not fair that men are considered, success objects. Like, there's this coin phrase, gold digger, right? There's not a lot of that phrase being used on the opposite sex. It's always used on women seeking men's resources, but that's fine. That is a feature of women's sexual strategy, because when you're pregnant and you're raising a kid, you can't go out and hunt. You can't protect yourself from, the big bad animals in the forest or the woods or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's men that have traditionally in the past provided that service. So yeah, there's a lot of things that aren't fair, but that's just the reality of how men and women mate select. I mean, there's a lot of guys out there today right now that are invisible to women on the sexual marketplace, absolutely invisible. And they're frustrated to no end. They say things to me like all the time, like, I'm a really good guy. I have a good job. I make $50,000 a year. I have a car. I pay my rent. I don't have any debt, but nobody wants to go out with me. Nobody even sees me. And that's the reality of that guy's life. That's not fair for him as well, but that's the reality of his life, right? Guys are expected to chase excellence, right? Like, you cannot just resign yourself to mediocrity or to an average life, because women, because they're hypergamous, are always choosing the best guys.
Exactly. Yeah. It's interesting that women get to just show up and men have to earn.
Men are made, women are just born, right? Yeah. Like, a woman needs to preserve her value on the sexual marketplace, which is not running around, of course. Right. A man needs to create his value on the sexual marketplace, because again, men compete, women choose. So men are doing the work, they're competing, they're going out there, they're doing all the difficult things. That's generally why they make more money, because they're taking greater risks. And that's okay. You don't want the mother of your kid to take great risks. You want them to be careful and protect your kid. Right. So that's why the sexes are complementary. But we've moved completely away from that. And, men and women have been bombarded with this message, and they're now completely drunk on this Kool-Aid of egalitarianism. Everything's equal. Men and women are the same. If you were born as a biological male, it doesn't matter. Call yourself a woman. You can compete with women and beat them in every single swimming event ever, sort of thing. So we have this strange, bizarre sort of thing evolving, and nobody's really doing anything to stop it. It just keeps kind of going in that direction.
Right. The thing I would say that's really important for women to hear, or parents with daughters to hear, is, it's a key phrase, what you just said. Women need to preserve their value. And one of the ways they do that is by being prudish.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the reality of it.
That's actually the reality of the way that it works in the rest of most of the world, right? Like, the vast majority of the world, that's the way that it works.
And throughout history.
And throughout history, yeah.
Yeah. We just have somehow, the Western culture has just decided that that's not the way it works, like in the last 30 years.
Got to get those two toasters in the two house, my friend.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. So what advice would you have for men and for women? And, men are the chasers, women are the choosers, as has been said, right?
Yeah.
What advice would you have for each side there? Like, for example, when we talk about women preserving their value, how can a man find that woman, or at least know what kind of woman she is? Because they're never going to tell the truth. Right. You're going to have to read between the lines. For example, one girl that I dated had been to, over 100 countries. What do you think she's doing? Right.
Well, that's a red flag. I mean, traveling that much to me is a red flag. Somebody that knows a whole bunch of really important people is a red flag. Somebody that's, like, if you look at their social media presence and she's an attractive gal and you see her on private jets, yachts, sports cars, exotic car rallies, that's a red flag. She's been around. So, I mean, you're asking a lot of questions there. So, I mean, my advice to guys is to build their value, is to focus on themselves, make themselves their own mental point of origin, stop chasing gals, stop settling for mediocrity, chase excellence, not women, build a life for yourself. And when you are going to deal with women, be discerning in your taste. right? Just because, a girl gives you some attention, responds to you and wants to see you again, or maybe, wants to claim you sort of thing, doesn't mean that you need to accept that, right? I mean, the biggest decision that you can make in your life as a guy, or probably one of the most important ones, is who is it that you're going to invite in your life? Even beyond that, who is it that you might make the mother of your kids, right? Because if she's made some bad choices in her past, and I've got this chapter in my book on red flags, and I kind of get into details about, some of the warning signs that guys should look out for, then that will give them an opportunity to sort of vet for that. Now, as far as what women need to do, they need to stop listening to this nonsense about everybody's equal and exactly the same, and recognize that the sexes are complementary and they're not competitive. And it's okay for women to be women and for men to be men. And it's okay for women to be feminine and men to be masculine. And it's okay. All of that's good. The key thing that women have to remember is that they need to preserve their value, like we said earlier. There's no guy that's ever looked at a woman, a gorgeous woman who's got 3 degrees on her wall, framed in the most beautiful mahogany ever, practicing doctor, surgeon, whatever, and said to their friend, "Hey, did you see the degree on that gal?" They're always looking at the optics of her beauty. The figure and the form of beauty comes in the looks. And that's what guys are looking at. And that's what they need to preserve and to protect. But we're not doing that anymore. So we've got this messed up sort of environment. There's no woman that usually shares her pot of gold with a guy. But guys, like a very wealthy guy will change a broke woman's life. But a very wealthy woman won't even look at a broke guy.
Yeah, you alluded to that earlier when you talked about how there's this whole group of invisible men. And yet it's ironic that many women would call men shallow because they're into beauty, right? They're more visual creatures than women are, right? And yet women just ignore this whole huge segment of the population of good, otherwise good men, right?
Well, women also love the optics of attraction too, right? I mean, women actually have a very, very long list of demands of men. Got to be tall, got to be rich, got to be funny, got to be alpha, also has to be soft, has to be a shoulder to cry on, has to be competent, has to be able to fix stuff, has to be good with my kids, has to, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the only thing that guys really prioritize is sexual availability. Does she like me? Will she go to bed with me? That's what they generally tend to prioritize. So women have a much longer list of demands of men. So there's lots of elements that we can get into.
Yeah. But I want to make sure people understand this consolidation concept, and we'll wrap it up maybe with this. But why are all of these men invisible? Because the marketplace has changed to where social media has made it so women can be connected and super hypergamous. I mean, hypergamy always existed throughout history, and we're all glad that it was there because it was an evolutionary thing. We wouldn't be here maybe otherwise, right? Yeah. But now it's become this like hypergamy, if that's a right way to say it. And social media facilitates that, doesn't it? Instagram specifically.
Yeah, it amplifies it. So the most successful guys will be amplified on social media. The most insignificant guys will be invisible. They're not seen. Nobody's following them. They don't have a blue check mark. They don't have 1 million followers. They're not doing interesting things with their lives. You won't see posts of them on supercar rallies, on yachts and stuff like that. So that's why they end up being invisible. And while the more successful ones are amplified, and all beautiful women are amplified, women don't need much to be amplified on social media. They just have to look good. Take a good picture, look great on the beach in that bikini, and you'll get 100,000 likes from a bunch of thirsty beta males. Yep. But the guy, on the other hand, for him to achieve that same level of acknowledgement and influence online, has to actually have done something with his life.
Yeah, good point. Any other thoughts you want to wrap up with, Rich? Advice, thoughts, whatever else, questions I didn't ask you, things we didn't cover, whatever.
No, I think we covered a lot. I think the best place to start probably is to just read the book, the Unplugged Alpha. And if you want to sort of dive a little further down the rabbit hole, the podcast that I have on YouTube is also called the Unplugged Alpha as well. It's on every Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. And I take calling questions and I sort of kind of build on the book. So new ideas and sort of concepts around becoming that Unplugged Alpha male so that you can put yourself first and get what you want out of life. Good stuff. Rich Cooper, thanks for joining us. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.